Larry Stewart lost his wallet and money in the Chicago airport. He and his invalid son were stranded until a miracle happened. I'll be right back. I wonder if you're as fed up as I am with all the prophets of doom who have us living in a sick society wrapped up in selfish materialism. They sound like a line from the poem The Shooting of Dan McGrew. You know the line, half-dead things in a half-dead world, clean mad for the muck called gold. Well, as the song says, it ain't necessarily so. There are any number of stories tucked away in the middle pages of our daily papers, and even more that don't get printed at all, about an America that's all around us every day, a different America than the one described by the doom-criers. A journalism student learns that news stories are based on who, what, or where. For example, a who story is one that's news because the person involved is famous or notorious. A where story doesn't have to involve a famous person to be news. It's the location that makes it newsworthy. A young man drives his car through a gate. He wasn't a well-known figure, and hitting a gate isn't all that unusual, but it's a story if it happened to be the White House gate. The what story, of course, is about something that's happened. Some weeks ago, the AP carried a what story. Larry Stewart, a disabled construction worker, took a plane from Detroit to Chicago with his 3-year-old son, Rocky. He was taking him to a hospital there. Rocky is unable to control the muscles in his legs. When they arrived at O'Hare Airport, Larry discovered his billfold with $80 was missing. He didn't even have money to get to the hospital. Stewardess Marcia Grieger was the first to learn of his plight. A hasty search of the plane failed to turn up the wallet. Before the plane continued on its way to Phoenix, Arizona, the stewardess gave Larry Stewart $27.50 the crew had contributed for cab fare to the hospital. When she gave Larry the money, he didn't want to take it, and only did so if he could have the names and addresses of the crew in order to repay them. After the plane took off for Arizona, Miss Grieger asked some of the passengers to look around their seats for the missing wallet. They learned the whole story about Larry and Rocky and the missing money. One of the passengers suggested a collection. Almost instantly, Marcia had $150 in her hand. Then a man on the other side of the plane wanted to know what was going on. When he heard the story, he started collecting. A 9-year-old boy drew a get well card. Others asked for Rocky's address so they could write to him. The passengers were clapping and cheering as Marcia said it was beautiful but crazy. On the following Saturday, stewardess Marcia Grieger was back in the Midwest. She presented Rocky's father with a set of stewardess wings, a chief pilot's wings, a letter to Rocky that said, "Someday have your daddy tell you how 11 of us, the crew, and 240 passengers, fell in love with a little guy most have not even seen. In the meantime, if you ever get the feeling that the whole world is bad and no one cares, give these wings a long look." There was $426 in the letter. Rocky's father, holding back his tears, said it all. "I just forgot that people are like that." This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening. A Frenchman had the last word on American charity, and it was over 100 years ago. I'll be right back. Americans are in their time of discontent, perhaps more so than at almost any other time in our history. Our young people have heard in classrooms too much of what's wrong with America. Many of the rest of us yearn to feel once again that old Yankee pride we once had, that belief in ourselves and in our nation. The other day I told you a story about a plane load of citizens who spontaneously came to the aid of a destitute father and his crippled son. It was a heartwarming story, but it really wasn't unusual. We're still a generous people, more so than most, and we put our money where our hearts tell us it should be. Every year, in spite of all the billions of dollars in taxes taken for welfare, federal aid to education, subsidies for the arts and cultural activities, we voluntarily contribute another $25 billion to do the same kind of good causes. There are some who would substitute government planning and government support for all this volunteer effort on our part. They lack confidence that we, the people, would care for the needy if government wasn't forcing us to do so. Well, some of us can still remember when foreign aid was voluntary. Sure, there was cooperation from government, but saving millions of Belgians from starvation after World War I was a volunteer citizens program. And so it was when Tokyo was devastated by an earthquake. We raised funds for starving Armenians, for victims of fire and flood and drought wherever they were in the world. And the image of America all over the world was of the great, generous, helpful neighbor. More than 100 years ago, a Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville came to America fascinated by our democracy and our success. He wrote a book about us. He said to his French friends, "You may not believe this, but in America, when someone sees a problem that needs solving, he doesn't call on government. He crosses the street and talks to a neighbor about it. And the first thing you know, a committee is formed, and before long the problem is solved without any bureaucrats being involved or any new government program started," unquote. Well, if we lose this particular facet of our American personality, and we can lose it if we continue to ask government for help on things we really do for ourselves, something precious will be lost. Let's not substitute for charity the coercion of taxation. The next time you hear that line about things being too complex for us to handle without government help, that only big government has the capacity to do the really big things, don't you believe it. Here in this country, we have more churches and libraries, support more symphony orchestras, more operas, and more nonprofit theaters with voluntary contributions than all the rest of the world put together. We have more doctors and hospitals in proportion to population than any other people, and 1/3 of all the young people in the world who are getting a college education are getting it in this country. For that matter, if we double our present troubles, we're still better off than people anywhere else in the world. This is Ronald Reagan. Thanks for listening.